Thank you. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to do this by hand because I'm using my own thing, so this won't work. Anyway, we're here today, and I want to tell you a little bit about how we work at my company, Next Games, and this is all about monitoring, so basically data and how we feed it into how do these become features. I'm going to walk you a little bit through a player segmentation process and what data we have been gathering, and how with this kind of insights that we gain, how do we develop features? You know, what is our process there? So on my agenda, I will tell you a little bit about myself and the company that I'll be working for. Then I will also give a quick introduction to games as a service, because that's our business model, and I think it's really important to understand, you know, what KPIs are actually important for us in this kind of model. So I give you a quick introduction, then it goes to the beef, the monitoring and the feature development. So let's get started, because we're already behind, right? Okay, so a little bit about me. I'm a UX designer since a couple of years. I have started my career in 2006 as a graphic designer for a really long time. I did a lot of editorial, actually. That's where my love for information hierarchy comes from. You know, crafting sensible, you know, even books, and then later digital products where, you know, readability, legibility, just, you know, a sense of, you know, understanding information, that is for me like at the core here. And the company that I work for is called Next Games. It's a mobile games company. We don't come up with our own worlds necessarily. We work actually with franchises, so that means we join franchise holders, so people that have big IPs and create cinema movies or series or books, and together with these kind of companies that create these fantastic products, we create the games for these kind of IPs to bring to the fans to enjoy basically these kind of games based on them, you know. And some IPs that we work with, the biggest one is The Walking Dead. We have actually 2 Walking Dead games. The latest that came out is a location-based game where you can kind of play like Pokemon Go, but instead of you know, gathering cute monsters, you actually shoot zombies with your friends, so it's a bit different. But our first Walking Dead game was a very classic RPG strategy game, and that is the one that I'm going to talk about. I worked really long on that, and we gained a lot of insights, and that's what I'm going to share with you. I want to give you a quick 30-second trailer for the game so you get an idea, you know, what you actually need to do. So let's take a look. Actually, there is some kind of sound, okay, but if we don't have any sound, that's fine too. So basically you shoot zombies, you slash zombies, just like in the Walking Dead series. You know, you collect these awesome heroes that you have, you know, just saw yesterday in the TV show, you know, Negan with his super cool weapon. You can collect everything around that, you can level them up. Typical story, role-playing game. What is specific about the genre of this game is that it's a turn-based. That means you have a lot of time of thinking, so this game is not super action. You need to do things really quickly, but instead you have time to think, and it's very strategic, basically, the elements of the game and how to advance. That is what this game is all about. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So games as a service, you know, in mobile games, you know, this new kind of, well, newish kind of revenue model that, you know, nowadays is really popular is the free-to-play. Actually, where this all comes from is called this kind of umbrella term, games as a service, and that exists, you know, not in the last decade, but this started in the 90s with all the massively multiplayer online role-playing games. So this is nothing new. It's just something that has kind of evolved with like new models inside. Free to play is just one model inside games as a service, which games as a service basically means, or what it was created for, is to gain revenue still after an initial sale of a product. So, you know, back in the days you had, or also nowadays there are still games you pay $60 and that is it. even though nowadays there are a lot of updates coming you can pay for, usually a classic model of monetization was this initial say you had a really long development pipeline, you paid for the game, and that was kind of it. Then usually the development teams moved on to to the next thing that will take many years. This has changed significantly. So what came with this is these really massive worlds that we are actually crafting that have a really big sense of community. So that is really what is in there at the core. All of these free-to-play kind of games, or really many of them, are actually still have this MMO, this massively multiplayer online gaming thing at the core. They are all live. They are all online games who get continuously developed. So this is what this business then is all about, to have this kind of product that I think many of you nowadays, I think in all the apps, we try to not have these kind of things that we make and forget about, but we learn about them now with all this data that we have and try to improve them. So, and that is the same way that this kind of works. And the important thing about this is the free-to-play thing, because with free-to-play there are, very specific KPIs that are important for us. So these are the three really main ones. So due to our games being free to play, players can freely download them and play with them. There is no initial sale. We haven't converted anyone. We haven't gained any monetary value in that sense. So we need to retain these players, which means that we need them to come back to our game. We need to engage them with our content, and then in the end, if we did things right and people actually had fun and they had a good time, we can convert them into paying users. And then, this is where all of this kicks in. Then that's where the business basically lies. And that is really important, because the monitoring that I will show you, the data that we collect, is all about how do we improve these, how can we get our business to thrive, basically. It is these three KPIs, key performance indicators, that we, really care about. And the engagement really basically stands for fun, and the same it's for retention. You come back to a product because, you had a good experience. That is all, what we are trying to do. Basically, create a good product, just like any one of you. We also have a little bit of, how would I say this? Many of you work on apps that actually solve problems. Maybe with your app I can call a cab, or it takes care of my banking, or you solve problems. So I'm already, there is a bit more value, or like I'm maybe even to some certain extent dependent. You make my life easier, but with the products that we are doing, they are pure entertainment, so it's already a little bit, easier for people to drop these. Someone can download our game and then it's like, either, there were technical problems in the start, or they didn't understand something, or they just, it wasn't as engaging. It's very easy to drop. So for us, it's, it's even harder, this whole retention thing, to get people to come back. No one is relies on having these apps. That is good to know. And something about the market also, this whole retention thing is important. It's really, I don't know how it is for you, but for us it's extremely expensive to do user acquisition. I think the current dollar value per user is around $8. So, and due to the nature of games, a lot of people churn, or they kind of try the game and they are like, it's not actually what I was looking for, or I'm not as interested. So just imagine this huge amount of users that you paid for coming to the game who actually don't stay. So that is not a good business case. So that's why we work on these kind of things. So yeah, let's move forward to the monitoring. We have the same probably as you. We have daily metrics, daily active users, how many new users come in, what's the average revenue, there. And then, of course, the retention, which is really important for us. And due to the nature of games, a player who logs in at day 1 has a very different experience than a player at day 7 or day 30. So this metric is really important to us. because the player at day one, due to the game's nature, has a different experience because the game changes. You progress through our product at very in the start at very fast pace. You unlock new features. The whole product actually can look visually very different to you depending on what day or at what point of progression you are. So there is a lot of very specific learnings and very specific parts of the game and the flow and the experience that we actually need to care about and look at. But the daily metrics only go so far, and maybe you can find, of course, on the day-to-day basis, hey, you rolled out a new update and you find, okay, something changed in the retention, maybe there are technical issues, there are bugs, you can find stuff, but how do you really improve, how do you really improve these basic KPIs to retain players, to engage them and maybe to convert them? For that, you need to actually learn about your audience. You need to find the segments. Who are these people that are interacting, actually with your product? And that's where we needed to kind of find a way to find out about them. So we came up with this initial set of kind of questions, like how could we go on about identifying these kind of audience segments? We call them also player types. So we asked questions. And as you saw earlier, maybe in the video, there is a lot of ways to fight against zombies. And we have a lot of features that do that. And they are all missions, so different mission types. These are our main features where there's actually some kind of actions, you interact with the gaming world, you do your strategy, that it's called also sec-to-sec. It's a second-to-second kind of gameplay, where you really where you have maybe most of the fun also, let's say like that. So anyway, it was, we have a lot of these features that do kind of similar things, but in different ways. So we were like, all right, so what missions do players play? What is their favorite way of slashing these zombies? Because there are so many. Maybe by looking at that, we can find out. And from this kind of questions, more questions came up. For example, how do these players progress then related to this player type? Because there is lots of things going on in there. Then there is also, of course, in the long run, due to, again, the nature of a game that changes drastically throughout the lifetime of these kind of players due to different things happening and unlocking. So how do they transition maybe between these player types? An early segment, of players, looks very different, has a very different experience. So when they move on and get more experience, how do these kind of players look? What are they doing? And then, of course, we also have business-related questions like, how are these players spending? We need to know. So we did this approach. We took 1 week of data. The main measure was missions played per player, and what kind of missions. It's kind of a snapshot, of the overall of the game at that time. That was the first thing that we set out to do. And this is what we found. So 2 buckets. First bucket had 4 different player types, and they were this is a high engagement group. They played a lot of missions, which means they had fun. They loved the content that they saw, they played, they kept coming back, and it also meant that they spent more. And then there was a second bucket. With this kind of erratic player, they weren't as engaged. They played very few missions, and of course, they spent less. So we were like, okay, we need to learn about them. So a little bit more detail about these 5 player types that we found out about. In the highly engaged bucket, there was a story player. Story mode, a very classic mode in games, it's a curated content where we have little bits of this kind of Walking Dead world. We kind of wrote our own things there, and you fight against zombies. The other feature we had, mission feature, was a grind mission. You repeat one kind of similar mission to get a certain kind of item in the end of that. They loved that. The next player or audience segment that we found was a challenge player. where you basically join together with others to fight against the zombies and get points together to get really cool rewards. And the last ones that were really highly engaged were PvP players. It's players against players. And they were like also extremely like engaged. And something that we also learned at that point about the challenge and the PvP, people who interact with people, and it doesn't matter if they play against each other or if they cooperate with other people. Any kind of interaction with the real person leads to a higher engagement. Like that was really interesting to see. So these people who were in these features that set you up to work together or play against others, they had really great fun. That was the best. They created these skills together and then played against others. Like that worked really well. But then, you know, there was this one segment that didn't perform. So we called them the sleeper. So the sleeper was kind of like not very, you know, we called that the low engagement group. So we needed to find out, right? What is it with these guys? What are the problems here? What is happening in the experience? So what questions can we ask? And the main thing with the data that we now had was, well, you know, maybe it's not so bad. Maybe these sleepers actually become, you know, one of the highly engaged players. They become a story player, maybe they become a challenge player. So we wanted to find out about that. And we looked, you know, we looked into the data, how do they transition between these different player types that we just, you know, learned about, you know, and it looked really grim. So instead of becoming one of these, you know, highly engaged players, they either stayed in this sleeper group or worse, they churned, which in gaming means they quit your product and they never come back, you know. So this was the very first, you know, sign of you know, okay, we actually have a really big problem. You know, we need to look deeper and hence. So we needed to think, what else, what do we actually know about them by now? So we knew that they were new players because they had very low levels in the progression of the characters and in the gaming content. We knew that the missions that they mostly engage with are story, and we knew that they churn really quickly and leave our game. So the one thing again that we had to go on here from the data that we already gathered is story, right? We had pretty highly engaged story players, right? This feature was performing to our best knowledge. So going back to these player types, we were like, okay, let's do the same kind of thing with the story player. Let's find out how do story players transition between these player types. Do they become challenge players, grind players, or in the worst case scenario, sleepers? Well, it turns out that was the case, and even worse, instead of, you know, becoming not highly engaged, they became sleepers, or worse, they left the game. You know, after being, you know, we saw it, right? They were performing well. They loved what they saw. You know, so what's going on that these kind of highly engaged players who love the product, you know, why do they leave? You know. And here again, you know, to show it's pretty much the same. You know, they had exactly the same behavior as the sleepers. So, okay, now we knew, okay, we have a problem. How do we go forward? And how do we do it? Now we have, you know, something to go on from the data analysts. And also at any time while this kind of investigation is going on, the game designers and UX designers are usually involved in these findings and help with maybe formulating questions also regarding your product on how to find out a little bit more about these specific segments maybe of your product, of users. So what we needed to investigate, what we kind of learned from this is that early player flow is something that we should maybe take a closer look at, because it's these early kind of game players, the sleepers, what we found, and it's the story feature that is mostly, used by early game because it is actually the very first mission feature that we are introducing. So we had something to go on. And this is the kind of point where we hand this over to the design team, where it comes to, to the game team to actually take action, to take this further. And this is where I'm going to walk you through a little bit. How do we do this on a high level? So now we have something. We had, an initial problem from data sets. We know there are these specific kind of audience segments that are not performing, that they have issues when playing or navigating through our product. How do we find out about this? This is when we, start to look into more detail, like, as I said, this early mission flow, what is actually happening there. And this is also always a really good time to check in with your team because, I'm not really sure how it is for you, but we really need to use our product every day. We test our product. Everyone in the team tests almost every day. We have new builds, with kind of new features, with small updates that we are working on, and we all kind of make sure, like where are we at? What is the experience? And then on top of that, we also play our games, outside of this development cycle, as in the live, environment, So the team has gone probably through the same kind of experiences that these players have gone through. So there are usually a lot of really good insights and learnings, and I think it's probably the same for you, if you have tried out your own products, that you are like, okay, there are these very specific pain points where you are like, hey, I never got this really. Have you considered this? And this is when we also, at this kind of point, we define kind of product goals. So that means, what are the KPIs that we want to improve, and with what kind of ideas. This helps us to kind of create this design like pillars or top level things where we can return to when we, need to make tough decisions. You might forget. Sometimes development cycles can become long. And you might maybe lose or forget about, why did you initially set out to do this? So that really helps. So we are still in the investigation phase, but we kind of start defining these kind of product goals, about what are the initial problems that we try to solve. And the main findings that we had, and we needed to take a good look at also these underlying systems of our game, that early in this kind of story mode, for example, the progress slowed down, and that was due to difficulty rising, and these are these really specific kind of game mechanics that are underlying the games, how things really work just by numbers. So they were kind of easy to tweak for us and kind of playtest also to improve. So that was really good. So we knew we had something. Okay, we found out it's getting really hard early in the story mission to play, which could be also, if we wanted to have this intended experience, then there should be something else, though, right, that the players can engage with. But that wasn't the case. We also found out, due to looking at this kind of underlying game mechanics and also just about playtesting ourselves, that other features were actually not unlocked. There was nothing else to go on. There was no other experience for you besides being punished in this one mode that just got way too hard. So of course I'm going to drop this thing. I don't have a lot of fun. So these were the things that we found. Another one that we also wanted to address was, besides that either things were not unlocked and things were too hard, there was something that they could do, but people actually didn't find these features. So we found out, and again, this is also something that I learned from actually discussing with the team, and also observing them playing or interacting with the product. I could see how people from the development team couldn't even find, certain features. I asked them maybe hey, can you show me this screen? And they couldn't quite, get it right. So this is a big red flag also. If your own team can't, navigate the product correctly, you should, right away flag that. Okay, but now we had really, we had some really main things, and we were like, okay, definitely, let's address all these. And here's also a picture of what our game early, like maybe 2 years ago, looked like. You had this very basic set of navigations with only icons. When you started the game, there was this kind of a camp that we knew also from other games. So people need to, and this is one of these usability principles that, you know, we just didn't know better at that time. People couldn't recognize, you know, they couldn't remember what do these things actually do, and there were a lot of them. And the other thing that we had, you know, besides, you know, this being an initial, you know, problem that people couldn't, they couldn't remember what these icons do. And then the second thing, if you would click on one of these to get into, you know, a really cool feature and do something cool, there were these vast deserts of texts, and they were maybe not very pretty and not really engaging. So besides, you know, forgetting maybe about what something does, you don't even get into, you know, a way to play anytime soon, because you are presented with some kind of, you know, layers of information that weren't maybe as important, and you still needed to go, you know, press some kind of buttons to actually get to the kind of content that you wanted to, you know, actually play the game. So those were things that when looking, you know, at the product and playing with it, that we, you know, found out. And something that we do that I can really recommend, I know documentation is painful often, and it gets outdated really quickly, especially when you work in Agile. You know, you iterate really fast, but, you know, it doesn't need to stay up to date. All you need is, you know, a basic description, have some product goals, you know, maybe add some user stories, you know, later you can add wireframes. It doesn't need to be even as much as what we have put here, because this was a massive feature. You know, the more vast or big this thing is that you do, the more info you have to go on, the better, of course. Because again, as I said, these product goals and this feature brief kind of works like a you know, design pillar in the end. You know, when you create these kind of features, you can go back later if you have to do tough calls. Hey, why did we do this? What were the initial goals that we set out to do, and that will help you, you know, to do these tough calls at a later stage. And then we do a lot of this, you know, the usual. It's the same as I think for many of you. We do a lot of wireframing, you know, just sketching out things. We go back then still to Photoshop nowadays. We do a lot in Sketch also. You know, a lot of this. And while we do this, you know, we share a lot of these with the team also we have a really constant feedback loop. I know it's not easy to share a lot these things that you work with, and you know they are not ready. But, you know, the earlier people can, you know, point out to you what could be problematic, the better. You know, the more people, the better. I know it's hard. You know, there's a lot of feedback usually, but it's definitely worse. This is what we then ended up with. So besides all these underlying things, all the underlying like numbers that we addressed, like decreasing the difficulty in the story and unlocking maybe other features earlier so players could interact with them, we also addressed the visual problem, and that was one of the biggest things that we did actually. We introduced this kind of accessibility hub. So instead of these scattered icons and with the features like hidden behind them that do certain things, we created this one place. Hey, these are all the cool things that you can actually do in our game. You can all find them here. We worked on the goal setting. You can see what kind of rewards you get. You can even see when they would unlock. You know, there are timers, you know, and what have you. We have also other content featured then that you can play. So this is how we address these initial findings of people not finding things, and we thought that was, you know, in the end also all of these things, you know, we set out to do them, you know, but, you know, do you know that will work? I feel like, okay, we just go by our best assumptions and by our experience, but, you know, you will only know later when these, of course, go live, these products, you know, did you achieve what you wanted? Did it solve the problem? It's you know, where I also feel like it's hard to do these things. You go by your best assumption, and you check in with your people, and, you know, you hope you hit home. So yeah, what we do then, we have this thing we call actually, we're not quite there. I'm still actually going through one round of iteration, but many of these things happen at the same time also. So what I, like to do, especially when something is, this was a massive feature, it was a massive change to the game. So what we do is team presentations. We share with the team what is happening. We share the mock-ups. We share the product goals. Everyone is part of this kind of journey of understanding. Why are we doing this? They can challenge your assumptions. They will challenge your designs, which is really a great help. If it's smaller things, you can just share them in the Slack channel also. As long as there is some kind of, tool where people can give feedback, I think that's really helpful. Because this is the initial reaction, at least from our kind of teams. They have a lot of, questions, which are usually really good things that, you haven't just thought about. And there is always something you haven't thought about. There is always something that, in your view, this also, hey, I made this way, so you use it this way. And then it turns out that they see it, what you've done, and they think it does something completely different. It really helps a great lot. So you do a lot of this kind of iteration with the team. You keep sharing the iterations. The team stays involved at any time. You will never get to that everyone is happy, but you kind of will get to the point where you feel like, okay, I have addressed the biggest issues that people have pointed out, and the rest needs to be verified, when maybe the product goes live. Then there is another tool that we are using to make sure that these kind of features that we have, so meticulously planned out, really make it into the game in a certain kind of quality. It's called a feature team. So instead of, back in the days, we kind of picked people from the team who also made features, but also a couple of other things. We now have a team that actually takes the ownership. They are doing this one thing. They have the complete responsibility of shipping this feature and also iterating on it while developing, it. They do the testing, everything. They make sure, what we have set out with the design team and with the team in general, that was also what ends up in the game. Because usually, you build something and, there are also more learnings, right? So you want to have those things in there. Then they perform something called a component breakdown. So that is kind of just a functional spec. Okay, what kind of buttons do we need? What kind of logic are necessary for all these screens? From that kind of thing, we make sure, okay, is this feasible? In what amount of time? All of these things are really important. And, the more ownership the people in your team have, the more, and they will struggle also in the start, but, the better that people can learn, if it's their responsibility to do these things. And then we do the same, I think, as many of you, we implement, in Agile, we iterate a lot, we do a lot of bug fixing, we polish, we check in with the other teams in-house, we maybe let your mother play or your friends. I think that really helps. And then it all goes through QA. And if you remember, this is what initially our game looked like, with these kind of icons that people didn't know what kind of hides behind them. We added finally these kind of text with them, so no one will ever forget what any of these are about. And the other thing, if you have seen, there was one feature in the bottom right that was leading to this kind of story missions. We now instead have this kind of hub where we have collected all of them. And initially it looked like this, and this is how it goes. You set out to do this thing, and this is what's actually in the game. So, a lot of things, are happening from this initial, draft and the initial thing that you set out to address. But there is usually, a lot of business things that come also there that are important, or also feedback. And maybe we want to have some kind of ads there, and also we need some timers. So this is how things change, throughout this kind of development cycle, and also being live and getting feedback usually. And you remember this kind of, when you opened a feature, you had this unleggable kind of screen with all kinds of infos in them. So now instead, when you click on one of these tabs, you are right away into the kind of feature. This is how all the missions look like. Any kind of feature with the mission that you would interact with has the same kind of look. So you can right away actually start and get into the action of these kind of features. So there's a little bit less, things in between. It eases the flow to some of these things. And yeah, we all, the big release, right? It's there. I have to say, the big learnings from this kind of stage is allocate time for not only to review the data again, but for us, due to the nature of games and that we work with franchises, we have a lot of feedback, about what people love or hate. They are extremely opinionated and engaged. So we actually need to allocate a lot of time, at least 1 week or more, to come back to what have we done and what is the perceived experience for all of these players. So besides them writing about this, there's of course the new kind of data that comes in that basically shows, are these assumptions that you made, are they correct or not? Yes. I need to speed up, I can see, okay. And in games it's really hard, you have these, you set out to do something, you try to verify with your team. We find out there sometimes, what you did is confusing. Things that you left out that you thought were okay, in the end they are missing. You need to allocate time to bring these back. So what did we do? We monitored, besides your daily, data that you kind of receive, try to find out, make some snapshots, learn a bit more about these users that you are catering towards. How do their journeys look from day to day, from week to week, in very specific segments? You can learn a lot about these. Do a proper investigation, involve everyone. There are great learnings among your team. Everyone has, who works on your products, they might have really good ideas, and just involve them. And then in the end, also test with them and keep iterating. And my biggest takeaways are, create really strong relationships between your analysts and the game designers or UX designers. There is so much potential there. It's really incredible. And I think it can always be improved because often they might be working too siloed. And also don't slack on the documentation. I know it's painful and it doesn't stay up to date, but it really helps you in the long run to see that you also did we design something that in the start what we set out to do, and give your teams full ownership. There is no loss there, and that's all. Thank you.